Does your family have a not safe for work scandal? Yeah, so my uncle was in love with and sleeping with his first cousin while he was married. During that affair, his wife got pregnant. My uncle didn't want his lover cousin to find out, so he made his wife get an abortion. So his freaking cousin he was having intimacy with wouldn't know he had still been sleeping with his wife. A few years ago, a relative had an affair with their boss. My mom and I were initially the only ones to find out because said relative tried to use mom as an alibi, and I found out by running into them at work and noticing that they seemed a bit too close, said relative strong-armed mom into also being a confidant for her husband, who was obviously starting to suspect something. That put mom in a really tough spot, and when she was convinced to break the news to the relative's husband, that whole corner of the family threw mom under the bus, and we haven't spoken to them since. It really was a shame, because that relative was like an auntie to me. The husband was also just a really stand-up guy who didn't deserve any of that. I had a cousin I used to like, active in veteran support circles, had been honored at events and baseball and hockey games. Lots of fun, non-judgmental, young veteran, the family's golden boy. Became even more of a hero after being diagnosed with cancer, presumably as a result of the burn pits in Iraq. He died earlier this year. 3.5 years ago, his younger brother told me that he had been molested by him as a teenager. Not only that, but I found out that much of his service in Iraq had been wildly exaggerated, and a lot of his posturing as a spokesman for veterans was actually him taking credit for the real work being done. His younger brother, a victim, an Afghanistan vet. The victim cousin provided proof of all of this in the form of texts and a recorded conversation with his brother in which he pretty much admitted to the molestation. The whole thing has divided the extended family. My immediate family, my dad's cousin's family, and my uncle and his wife are on the victim's side. The rest of my dad's siblings and their families, they just kind of pretend that this never happened, despite the solid evidence provided to them all. The sad thing is that, for years, the victim cousin was denigrated as a black sheep of the family who fucked up and caused drama for no reason, thanks to his brother controlling the narrative and slandering him at every opportunity while holding himself up as a big war hero. Dying of cancer was frankly the best outcome for him. My cousins, they are two brothers who each had long-term girlfriends and each had multiple children. Oldest brother split with his girlfriend and kept custody of his kids. Youngest brother was severely injured and was in hospital for a long time. He self-destructed and left his girlfriend and kids to do dumb shit. Oldest brother eventually got with his brother's now ex. They are now married with custody of all of their children and have had more kids. They are all happy and doing well, but their kids are now brother cousins, which is weird. I was at a friend's wedding. Father of the groom was a bit of a dodgy fella and was known to do a bit of cocaine. At this wedding, he was caught coming out of the small bathrooms that was in this mega stately home where the wedding was, but he wasn't alone. He exited with a young girl in her teens. The teen girl's dad caught them coming out, and as you can imagine, it all kicked off. He had to come clean that nothing was happening, but they were just sharing a line. Is that a lesser evil? When I was a kid, my uncle dropped acid or some substance on Christmas Eve. Anyway, he was so messed up that my grandparents wouldn't let him drive home. He was also so messed up that he tried to crawl into my grandfather's bed and stick his finger up his butt. My grandpa ended up falling out of bed and fled downstairs to sleep on the couch. My mother and aunt were laughing so hard for some reason, even though my grandfather was rightfully upset and shocked, of course. That's when we found out my uncle was gay. Legit, the next morning, he had no recollection of the event other than the worst hangover of his life. My grandmother forbade the family to ever speak about it again. My grandfather used to leave my dad and his siblings outside overnight, even if it was cold, even if it was raining, and make them stand up all night, as young as for yo and on school nights. This is one example of the awful shit he did. He was big on psychological warfare and mean, sneaky shit. Broke their toys, would pit them against each other, would get their mother on them. He was the dog that ate their homework. He starved my dad's little brother to the point authorities were called by an unknown person -50+, and he still has scars on his body from the sores that the malnutrition caused. He used to wait until they were asleep to belly crawl down the hallway and yank them out of bed for beatings over things from days, weeks earlier. My 60-yo dad still has night terrors. It was really unhinged behavior. There are many things that could be categorized as worse than beatings. So much so that my dad doesn't think beatings are bad and thinks we're ungrateful because we hold his abuse against him when it could have been so much worse. Even if I agree with him that it could have been worse, and I am grateful he wasn't the biggest piece of shit he could be, I still think it could have been better. My aunt was a hoarder, and none of us had ever been in her house. We had suspected for years that she was a lesbian, but it was never confirmed. This was my grandfather's sister, so she was born around 1913. They were also very Southern and very Baptist, not exactly a coming-out friendly generation or environment. She was more than a little bit weird, but in a fun way. She was always hilarious to be around and would crack jokes that made other family members clutch their pearls. She was a world traveler with her friend and never had kids. Her friend was her sole beneficiary, along with a cat rescue. It was always sad to us that she never felt comfortable sharing her life with us, but I think that generation just never really felt comfortable. She died very unexpectedly after falling in the shower in the early 90s, and my mom and some of her cousins went to clean her home out. While they were there, they were going through pictures to figure out which ones her siblings might want and came across thousands of pictures of penises. Not real-life ones, but zoomed-in ones from statues, paintings, etc., all from around the world. My aunt had zoomed into just the penis on all the art. They could find no other pictures of the full piece of art. So for instance, there was the David, but only his penis. No picture of the whole statue in its entirety that they could find. My mom and her cousins spent a full day having so much fun, laughing their asses off, drinking wine, and trying to figure out what piece of art around the world that penis belonged to. This was pre-Google, so they had to try and do it from memory. One of the cousins still has the photos and has apparently turned it into a board game of sorts that she plays with friends. My great-grandmother left my great-grandfather after they had 2 kids because she didn't like being a mom. While she was gone, she literally started working in a whorehouse. A little under 2 years after she left, she came back and dropped off a kid for my great-grandfather to take care of. 6 years after that, she came back, took my great-aunt, and gave her to her biological father. I believe a year after that she came back and decided she was ready to be a mother to my grandmother and great-aunt. My great-grandfather and her were together for the rest of their lives. He took care of her when she was deathly ill to the day she died over 40 years later. My second great-aunt tracked down my great-grandfather in her early 20s and lived the rest of her life like she had 2 fathers. Needless to say that family gatherings could be tense at times. My mom cheated on my father regularly with my sister's friends while she was in high school. Also through parties for my sister and her friends, where underage drinking and illegal drug use took place regularly. My sister, who had a different father than my brother, and I also went almost 40 years thinking her father was her biological dad until recently, where a DNA test proved my mom also cheated on her first husband and pretty much lied and made him raise a daughter that was never his, which was no easy task, by the way. My mother also was sleeping with the lead singer of Megadeth while he was happily married and took me to a concert of theirs while I was like 9 to 10. Left me in the VIP area with the rest of the band who was doing drugs all night while she was doing God knows what with him somewhere. It's 1970 and I'm probably 6 or 7 years old at the time. Just came home from 1st grade and was watching television when one of my aunts came home and told me to turn off the television and go upstairs. It was only later that day that I learned the news. My grandfather, who had a massive drinking problem, had been in a 1-car accident with my 3 younger siblings. None of the kids were wearing belts or restraints. My youngest brother went through the car windshield, suffered tremendous skull and brain damage, and lived barely another 6 months before God called him home. For some reason, my baby brother was buried without a tombstone, and the rest of the family basically rallied around my grandfather, declaring that he made a horrible mistake in judgment, but that he was still a good man. 1st grade me couldn't figure any of that out. 1st grade me was still wondering why my brother wasn't home from the hospital the way my other brother and sister were able to come home. 40 years later, adult me tried to rectify the situation by paying out of my pocket for my brother's grave marker. With the help of the cemetery office, I was able to get a marker installed in 2010. The NSFW part was that in doing so, my extended family members accused me of ripping open old wounds. That for what my grandfather did was just a mistake, an accident, an error, and that my baby brother is now just an angel floating around in heaven. Even to this day, I will not drink 1 drop of beer or alcohol. And I've cut myself off from the rest of my family for good. As far as I'm concerned, if they believe that my brother is in heaven after what happened to him, they can all go to hell. My cousin got 2 women pregnant within weeks of one another. Both women gave birth to boys, and both named the boys juniors of his name. And played them both until the boys got to kindergarten, where 2 boys with very unique names and both junior met.